enter the realm of human relationships, we are immediately drawn into a theater that is not only external but profoundly internal. Every bond that ties us to another is a reflection of the bond we carry with our own unconscious. And so, when I speak of the empath who finds themselves trapped in toxic ties, unable to leave, even when reason screams for release, I am not merely describing a social phenomenon, I am describing a ritual enacted in the deepest chambers of the soul. You may imagine yourself as a victim of another's manipulations, but I tell you that this entanglement arises because the unconscious has recognized in the other a figure, a shadow, a wound, a fragment of your soul that longs to be seen. And until you acknowledge it, until you descend into that cavern where forgotten parts of you cry out, you will continue circling the same pattern again and again, like a moth drawn irresistibly to the flame that scorches its wings. What makes this so difficult is that the empath, more than most, is born with porous boundaries. You feel not only your own emotions, but the emotions of others seem to pour through you like currents of invisible electricity. And when those emotions come from a toxic figure, one who wounds you while simultaneously pulling you close, you do not perceive only their cruelty, you perceive their suffering, their brokenness, their childlike hunger for love. And so you confuse your compassion for destiny, you mistake your ability to absorb their chaos as a sacred mission to heal them. Yet beneath this impulse lies something darker, a reflection of your own unconscious material projected outward. For the empath does not merely choose the toxic bond, the empath soul is compelled by it, as if by a spell woven in archetypal fabric. Think of the myth of Persephone, carried down into Hades against her will. What does she do? She eats the pomegranate seeds, binding her forever to the underworld. So too does the empath, when bound to a toxic partner, take into their body the fruit of shadow. They do not simply endure pain. They become part of the cycle that keeps them returning season after season, even when they swear to themselves they will never go back. This is not weakness. This is archetypal law. The unconscious knows it has found a figure who mirrors a hidden truth. To walk away would mean to abandon the possibility of redemption, to leave the unconscious unresolved. And so you remain not because you are powerless, but because some part of you senses that this suffering carries a message that must be heard. You see, toxic bonds are rarely born in the present. They are echoes of old traumas, childhood patterns, the primordial cry of the inner child who once reached out for love and received abandonment, criticism, or neglect instead. That cry has never ceased. It has merely been buried beneath layers of adult reasoning. And when you meet a toxic figure, your unconscious recognizes them immediately, not for who they are, but for the wound they represent. They become the stage upon which your inner drama is reenacted. The empath cannot walk away because, in truth, they are not walking away from another person, but from their own deepest wound. And that is a journey too terrifying to make without first encountering its power in flesh and blood. The toxic bond becomes a mirror, painful, shattering, but also necessary, because without it, you might never have glimpsed the depth of your own unfinished story. Imagine a dream in which you are standing in a vast hall of mirrors. Some mirrors are smooth and flattering. They show you only the surface. But there is one cracked, distorted mirror at the far end. When you approach it, you recoil, for it shows not only your face, but the twisted, half-buried faces of ancestors, shadows, forgotten selves, and yet you cannot leave the hall until you face it, until you allow the horror of its reflection to penetrate you. This is the experience of the empath in the toxic bond. The distorted mirror is the partner who wounds and drains you, but also reveals to you what you have not yet been willing to face, your own unmet darkness. To flee from it is to remain blind. To stay is to risk destruction. But to engage it with consciousness, that is the alchemy of the soul. The empath's suffering lies in their inability to distinguish between compassion and bondage, because you feel so much that you imagine that your role is to heal the one who wounds you. Yet every attempt to rescue them drags you deeper into their abyss. Why? Because what you are really attempting to heal is not them, but the reflection of your own unconscious within them. The toxic bond becomes an alchemical vessel where your shadow and theirs fuse into a painful magnetic union. It is not a relationship in the ordinary sense. It is a crucible, and in every crucible, fire is inevitable. You burn because the impurities of your soul are being exposed. You feel trapped because your unconscious is insisting that you cannot walk away until you retrieve what was lost. But the tragedy is that most empaths mistake this for love. They mistake this for destiny. And so, instead of recognizing the bond as a stage for inner transformation, they cling to it as though it were salvation. And in doing so, they remain prisoners. I must tell you this clearly. The unconscious will bind you to a toxic figure until you learn what it has to teach. There is no escaping this law. You may leave one partner, but if you have not yet faced your shadow, you will find another who plays the same role, who reopens the same wound. The faces may change, the settings may shift, but the archetype remains. It is like a dream that repeats night after night until you decipher its meaning. The empath cannot walk away, because walking away would mean leaving the dream unfinished. And the psyche does not permit unfinished dreams. The psyche insists upon completion, upon wholeness. It will haunt you with repetition until you turn toward it with awareness. And when you do, when you finally see that the toxic figure is not your salvation but your mirror, then you are free. Not by fleeing, but by integrating the lost part of yourself that once chained you to them. Let us look deeper into this mirror. The empath often finds themselves bound to the narcissist, the manipulator, the wounded predator who thrives on control. Why this pairing? Because the empath embodies the archetype of the healer, while the toxic figure embodies the archetype of the wound that refuses to heal. Together, they form a symbolic dance. One offers endless energy, the other devours it. One offers compassion, the other responds with cruelty. And yet, beneath this grotesque rhythm lies a sacred truth. The empath is secretly afraid of their own power. By binding themselves to the one who drains them, they unconsciously avoid confronting their own independence, their own right to exist without serving another's needs. The toxic partner becomes both jailer and teacher, forcing the empath to confront the truth that love does not mean sacrifice without end. The archetype of the healer must one day face its shadow, the martyr, and until that day arrives, the empath will remain shackled. This is why I say that toxic bonds are initiations. They are not punishments from the universe, nor are they random misfortunes. They are initiatory ordeals, much like the trials of the hero who must descend into the underworld to retrieve a treasure. The empath descends into the toxic bond, not because they are weak, but because their soul longs to know itself more fully, and the toxic figure, though cruel, plays the role of gatekeeper. They force the empath to discover where their boundaries are, where their wounds lie, where their illusions of love still enslave them. Without such an ordeal, many empaths would remain forever in the illusion that their compassion is pure. But compassion that refuses to acknowledge its shadow becomes enslavement. It is only by walking through the fire of toxic love that the empath learns to distinguish between true compassion and the compulsion to sacrifice oneself, and that distinction is the key to liberation. So I say to you who feel trapped, do not despise the bond, for it has revealed to you the hidden laws of your soul, but also do not glorify it, for it is not your destiny to remain bound. Your task is to extract from the suffering the message it contains, and once the message is heard, once you realize that the one you sought to heal is a mirror of your own wounded self, you are no longer compelled to stay. You may walk away not out of rejection, but out of completion. The toxic bond has done its work. You have eaten the pomegranate seeds, you have walked the seasons of shadow, and now you return to the surface with wisdom you did not possess before. And yet, the journey is not simple, for even when you know this truth, the emotional tether remains strong. It is as if invisible cords bind your heart to theirs, cords spun from memory, from trauma, from the unconscious need for resolution. You may leave physically, but emotionally you remain haunted. And here lies the final test, to cut those cords not by force, but by consciousness, to look at them and say, you were my teacher, you showed me my shadow, I release you now. Only in this way is the empath truly free. For freedom is not the absence of bonds, it is the transformation of bonds into conscious choice. You may ask yourself, why does the empath always see the potential in the toxic figure, even when that potential never manifests? It is because the unconscious, in its wisdom and cruelty, presents the toxic other as a symbolic vessel, a chalice into which you pour your hope, not for them, but for yourself. You are not really seeing them at all. You are seeing a dream image, a figure conjured by your soul, the ghost of a parent who never truly loved you, the phantom of an old wound still bleeding beneath your surface. You look into their eyes and believe you see salvation, but what you truly see is the child within you, crying to be recognized, whispering, if I can make this one love me, then all will be healed. And thus you remain, because to leave would feel like betraying not them, but that inner child still yearning for redemption. This is why the bond feels unbreakable. It is not two adults negotiating love, it is two archetypes colliding. The empath embodies the archetype of the savior, the healer, the one who descends into the underworld to rescue the lost The toxic partner embodies the archetype of the wounded destroyer, the shadow figure who seduces and consumes. Together, they enact a myth as old as humanity itself. When you are caught in this myth, your rational mind is powerless. You may tell yourself 100 times, I must leave, but the archetype whispers more loudly, stay, for your soul's salvation is at stake. Until you recognize that you are inside a myth, you cannot free yourself, and recognition is painful, for it means admitting that the love you thought was sacred was in fact a projection of your unconscious drama. Consider the dreams of those trapped in such bonds. They often dream of being chased, of running down endless corridors while something dark pursues them, or they dream of drowning, pulled into waters they cannot escape. Such dreams reveal the psyche's struggle. The toxic partner becomes the hunter, the ocean, the archetype that will not release you until you face it consciously. And yet, within these dreams, there is always a glimmer. The door you might open, the surface of the water you might reach. The dream teaches what the waking mind resists, that freedom lies not in fleeing the figure, but in confronting the inner wound that drew you to them in the first place. The empath says, but I feel their pain. I cannot abandon them. What you must understand is that their pain resonates with yours. You are not merely perceiving their suffering, you are perceiving your own unhealed suffering mirrored in them. And this is the great trick of the unconscious. It disguises your wounds as another person's so that you will be drawn toward them. Unable to look away, only when you recognize this trick do you begin to break the spell. Compassion then must turn inward. You must become the healer of your own wound, rather than bleeding endlessly for another who refuses to heal themselves. Otherwise, your empathy becomes possession, a form of slavery where you confuse your identity with another's suffering. It is no coincidence that toxic bonds often feel addictive. The highs are ecstatic, the lows are devastating. This is the rhythm of trauma, not the rhythm of love. The brain itself becomes conditioned to crave the moments of tenderness amid cruelty, just as the child once craved a rare smile amid rejection. The body remembers, the soul remembers, and so you return again and again to the place where the wound was first inflicted. And this cycle is so compelling because it is archetypal. It is the repetition, compulsion Freud observed. But it is more than that. It is the psyche's demand for resolution. The wound seeks not mere survival, but redemption, and so the toxic bond becomes the stage where the ancient wound cries out, will you finally see me? Will you finally choose yourself? But how, you ask, does one break such a bond? Not by force of will alone, for the archetype is stronger than the ego. The first step is recognition, to see that you are enacting a myth, not merely living a personal failure. When you recognize that your suffering is patterned, that you are not alone, but are walking a path trodden by countless souls before you, something shifts. You begin to understand that this is not punishment, but initiation. And in initiation, the ordeal must be endured, but it must also be understood. You must ask yourself, what part of me is reflected in this bond? What shadow have I projected onto this other? What forgotten child within me is crying out through their cruelty? When these questions penetrate you, the cords begin to loosen, Let us turn for a moment to the symbol of the alchemical vessel. In the old texts, the vessel was sealed so that the transformation could not escape. Within it, opposites collided, fire and water, death and rebirth, poison and medicine. The empath and the toxic partner form such a vessel. Within their bond, love and cruelty, light and shadow, hope and despair are fused together. And just as the alchemists knew that gold could not be created without first enduring putrefaction, so too must the empath endure the putrefaction of toxic love before the inner gold of self-realization can emerge. The danger lies in confusing the vessel for eternity. The alchemists never intended to live inside the vessel forever. They sought only the transformation. Likewise, the empath must understand. The toxic bond is not your home. It is your crucible. Once the transformation occurs, you must step out, carrying the gold within you. And yet, even with this understanding, the heart resists. It clings to the illusion that the toxic figure will one day awaken, one day change, one day love you purely. This is the final trick of the unconscious, the last veil. It keeps you bound by dangling hope before your eyes. But remember this, the transformation does not lie in them. It lies in you. They may never awaken. They may never change. They may never love you as you long to be loved. But if you awaken, if you change, if you learn to love yourself with the compassion you once poured into them, then the cycle ends. You no longer need their transformation to complete yours. You walk away, not because you reject them, but because you no longer need them to mirror your wound. You have taken your reflection back into yourself. So hear me now. The reason you cannot walk away is because the story is not finished. But when the story is finished, when you have faced the shadow, when you have embraced the inner child, when you have retrieved your power from the projection, you will walk away without effort. It will feel as natural as waking from a dream. For toxic love is a dream woven by the unconscious, and once its meaning is integrated, it dissolves. What once held you captive now releases you, because you no longer resist what it was sent to teach. You have seen through the mirror, and what was once unbearable has become part of your wholeness. Thus, the empath's path is not to escape suffering, but to transform it, not to curse the toxic bond, but to extract from it the wisdom hidden within. And this is why, in truth, you were drawn to it. Your soul does not seek comfort, it seeks wholeness. And wholeness requires descent, confrontation, death of illusions, rebirth of the self. The toxic bond is the descent. The staying when you should leave is the confrontation. The despair is the death of illusion. And the moment you finally turn inward and claim your own power, that is the rebirth, then and only then are you free. When we peer into the depths of these bonds, we find that they are not only about personal histories, nor about individual wounds. They are about something larger, something archetypal that belongs to the collective unconscious. For every empath chained to a toxic figure is living out in miniature the eternal drama of light bound to darkness, of soul chained to matter, of spirit yearning for liberation from the prison of instinct. This is why your suffering feels so cosmic, so unbearable, so filled with destiny. It is because you are carrying not only your own wound, but the collective wound of humanity itself. That primordial split between wholeness and fragmentation, between love and rejection. The toxic bond makes you the bearer of that myth, and until you awaken to it, you are condemned to enact it unconsciously. You will notice that those who are empaths often carry dreams and fantasies of rescue, of salvation, of being the one who finally heals the broken soul. This fantasy is not merely personal. It is the archetype of the Redeemer, the Christ figure who descends to redeem the fallen, and it is beautiful, but also dangerous, for when you project that archetype onto a toxic figure, you give them divine power. You see in them not a wounded human being, but a God in exile, and you pour yourself out as the sacrifice to redeem them. This is why the bond feels sacred. Why it feels impossible to leave? Because your unconscious has turned it into a religious drama. To leave them would feel like abandoning your mission, betraying not them but the divine archetype itself. And yet, this is precisely the illusion that must be shattered if you are to be free. The truth is that the Redeemer archetype belongs to you, not to them. You are the one who must redeem yourself, not by saving the toxic figure, but by rescuing the parts of you that have been lost in shadow. When you recognize this, the spell begins to weaken. You realize that every time you stayed, every time you forgave, every time you endured cruelty in the name of compassion, you were unconsciously playing out the Redeemer drama. But redemption is not found in sacrificing yourself to another who refuses to awaken. Redemption is found in reclaiming the power you projected onto them and drawing it back into your own soul. Then the myth no longer controls you, you control the myth. And here is the paradox. You will never leave the toxic bond while you still believe that your suffering is meaningless. Only when you see its mythic significance, only when you recognize that you are playing a role in a sacred drama, do you begin to gain the power to transcend it. For it is not by denial that you escape the archetype, but by consciousness. You cannot simply say, "This is not my destiny," while still living unconsciously within the story. You must step into the center of the story, see its patterns, name its symbols, feel its full weight, and only then can you choose to end it. To bring the unconscious into consciousness is the very definition of liberation. The toxic bond is not merely something to escape, it is something to be illuminated. And once illuminated, it dissolves. Many empaths describe the toxic bond as if they were under a spell. They say, "I know it is destroying me, and yet I cannot stop." This is no metaphor. It is an accurate description of archetypal possession. When an archetype seizes the psyche, it is as if a god has entered you, a force greater than your ego, demanding enactment. You are no longer yourself. You are a vessel. The toxic partner is not merely a person. They are an actor playing the role of the archetype that has seized you to break the spell. You must recognize it as such. You must say, "This is not divine destiny. This is archetypal possession. This is my unconscious demanding recognition and by naming it, you weaken it. The spell begins to loosen, and you remember that you are not merely the actor, you are also the witness. There is, in every toxic bond, a profound longing for wholeness. The empath believes that if only they can endure enough, love enough, give enough, they will finally fuse with the other in a state of completeness. This longing is not wrong. It is the soul's ancient yearning for union with its own lost parts, but when projected outward onto another, it becomes destructive. You chase wholeness in the wrong place. You mistake the other for the missing piece of your soul, when in truth they are only the mirror of what you have lost. And so you cannot walk away, because to leave them would feel like leaving your own wholeness behind. This is the cruel trick of projection. The way out is to see that the wholeness you seek is not in them but in yourself. They are only the signpost, not the destination. And once you reclaim this truth, the longing shifts inward, where it can finally be fulfilled. I have said before that the shadow contains 90% pure gold. The empath's shadow is their unacknowledged hunger for love, for recognition, for power, for freedom. But instead of claiming this shadow, they project it onto the toxic partner, who seems to embody all the missing pieces. The partner becomes the thief of gold, holding hostage the very treasure that belongs to you. And so you remain bound, not because you truly love them, but because your gold is hidden inside them. To free yourself, you must reclaim your projection. You must see that what dazzled you in them was your own light, reflected back at you through the distortion of their wounds. When you take it back, the spell breaks. They shrink before your eyes, no longer a god, no longer a redeemer, but only a person, a wounded person, who cannot hold the power you once gave them. And at that moment, you are free. But freedom is not only psychological, it is also deeply spiritual, for to reclaim your projections is to step onto the path of individuation, the path of becoming whole. The toxic bond is not merely a mistake, it is a summons. It is the psyche calling you to awaken, to stop scattering your essence upon those who devour it, and to gather your fragments into the chalice of the self. Every tear you shed, every night you lay awake in torment, every moment you felt invisible or unworthy, these are not wasted. They are the heat of the alchemical fire, burning away illusion, preparing you for the birth of the self. And when that birth comes, when you finally see that the toxic partner was only a stage in your own individuation, you will no longer curse the bond. You will bless it, even as you walk away forever. You will know you are nearing liberation. When the bond begins to lose its glamour, what once seemed magnetic begins to feel hollow. What once felt sacred begins to feel absurd. This is the psyche's way of signaling that the projection has been withdrawn. The toxic figure has not changed, but you have pulled back the divine power you once poured into them, and they now appear only as they are. This disillusionment is painful, for it means letting go of the fantasy that sustained you. But it is also necessary, for without it, you cannot see the truth. And truth, though bitter at first, is the only medicine that heals. Do not imagine, however, that this liberation is the end of the journey. It is only the beginning, for once you leave the toxic bond, you must confront the emptiness that remains. You will feel as though a part of you has been torn away, and in a sense, it has the part of you that lived in the projection. Now you must reclaim it, nurture it, make it your own. This is the true work, to sit with the emptiness, to fill it not with another toxic figure, but with your own presence, your own love, your own wholeness. It is a lonely task, but it is the only path to freedom. For if you rush to fill the void with another, you will only repeat the cycle. The initiation is not complete until you can sit alone with yourself and feel that you are enough. Thus, I tell you, the empath cannot walk away from toxic bonds until they see the myth they are living, until they reclaim the archetypes they have projected, until they gather their own lost gold from the mirror of the other. Only then does the compulsion end. Only then do you walk away, not in bitterness, but in quiet power, carrying the treasure of your ordeal. And when you do, you will realize something astonishing. The very bond that once enslaved you was also the key to your liberation, for it forced you to descend, to suffer, to confront, and to awaken. Without it, you might never have sought the self. Without it, you might have remained asleep. And so, even as you close the door, you bow to the figure who hurt you, not in reverence, but in recognition. They were the dark angel who carried you to yourself. You must understand that liberation from these bonds does not occur as a sudden severing of chains, but as a subtle awakening of the inner eye. The moment arrives when the one who once held divine power over you appears suddenly to ordinary, their words echoing hollow, where once they rang with fateful weight. What has changed? Not them, but you. The projection has been withdrawn. You have seen that the love you craved was not theirs to give, but yours to reclaim. And in that moment, the cords loosen, not because you cut them, but because they dissolve in the light of consciousness. The empath must accept that wholeness is not found in another. As long as you believe that your missing half resides outside you, you will remain enslaved. This is the primal delusion, the belief that salvation lies in fusion with another soul. The truth is that salvation lies in union with yourself, in the reconciliation of shadow and light, of the forgotten child and the conscious adult, of instinct and spirit. The toxic bond reveals this truth in the most painful way, for it promises wholeness through another, only to betray you again and again. But this betrayal is a gift, for it drives you back to yourself. Every time the other fails you, you are invited to turn inward and ask, what part of me have I abandoned that I expected them to carry? What gold have I hidden in their hands that I now must take back? This retrieval is the essence of individuation. Individuation is not the pursuit of perfection, but the gathering of fragments into a whole. It requires you to reclaim your projections, to call back your soul from the places you have scattered it. The toxic bond is one of those places. You left a piece of yourself there, believing it belonged to them. Now you must return to collect it. And when you do, you will see that the power you thought was theirs was always your own. They were only the mirror. You were always the source. The dream images return here as guides. The drowning dream where you are pulled into deep waters, transforms into the dream of swimming upward, breaking the surface, gasping for breath, seeing the light. The chasing dream becomes the dream of turning to face the pursuer, realizing it is not a monster, but a frightened child. These are the symbols of liberation, the integration of what was once feared, the reunion with what was once rejected. The toxic bond has served its purpose. When you can reinterpret your dreams, when the symbols no longer terrify you, but instruct you, that is the alchemy. Fear turned to wisdom, pain turned to strength, shadow turned to gold. Do not underestimate the grief that comes with this liberation. For even when you awaken, you will mourn not for the toxic figure, but for the fantasy that sustained you. You will grieve the love you never received, the wholeness you never found in another, the childhood wound that was never healed by external arms. This grief is sacred. It is the mourning of illusions, the funeral of projections, and like every funeral, it creates space for new life. When the fantasy dies, the self is born, and though the self may not dazzle with the intensity of the toxic bond, it sustains with a quiet power that cannot be shaken. The empath's journey does not end in bitterness, it ends in gratitude, for when you look back, you will see that the one who hurt you was also the one who revealed you to yourself. They were the dark priest, the shadow guide, the unconscious emissary who forced you to awaken. Without them, you might still be asleep, projecting your light onto others, draining yourself in the service of shadows. But with them, through them, against them, you found your path. And so, even as you walk away, you bow, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of the paradox that the hand which wounded you also opened the door to your wholeness. Now you stand on the threshold of a new life. You have faced the underworld, eaten the pomegranate, endured the seasons of darkness. You have seen the mirror crack and have dared to look into it. You have wrestled with angels and demons and found that both live within you. And now you emerge carrying the treasure of your descent. The knowledge that love is not sacrifice, that compassion is not slavery, that empathy must be rooted in boundaries, and that your soul does not need another to complete it. You are whole, not because you found another half, but because you found yourself. And yet, the world will tempt you again. Archetypes do not disappear. They circle back, testing your resolve. Another toxic figure may appear, whispering the same promises, evoking the same longings. But now you are awake. You recognize the pattern. You feel the pull, but do not surrender to it. You say, I see you. Mirror, I honor the lesson, but I no longer need the wound. And you walk on, free. This is the true measure of liberation, not the absence of temptation, but the ability to remain conscious in the face of it. So, my friends, the reason empaths cannot walk away from toxic bonds is because the soul demands its initiation. The unconscious compels you to enact the drama until you see its meaning, but once the meaning is seen, the bond no longer binds. You carry it within you as wisdom, as gold, as part of your wholeness. And then you are free, not free from suffering, for suffering is part of life, but free from the compulsion to suffer blindly. You have turned your suffering into meaning, your bondage into initiation, your wound into power. And that is the essence of individuation. Let me leave you with this image. A labyrinth. At the center of the labyrinth waits the Minotaur, the monstrous figure who terrifies all who enter. The empath, drawn into toxic love, is like the hero who walks into the labyrinth believing they can save another, but finding instead that they must face the beast. The beast is not the partner, the beast is the shadow. And when you face it, when you recognize it as your own, you no longer fear it. You integrate it, you emerge from the labyrinth, not with another by your side, but with your own soul reclaimed. And that, my friends, is the ultimate liberation. To walk out of the labyrinth carrying yourself whole. So if you are still trapped, do not despair. The bond is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your initiation. Endure it with consciousness. Seek its symbols, name its archetypes, reclaim your projections. And when the time comes, you will walk away not as one defeated, but as one transformed. For the empath who cannot walk away becomes, through suffering, the awakened soul who no longer needs to stay.